Thanks a lot for turning out tonight in fantastic numbers. I'm your chairperson for the evening. My name is John Davidson. I'm a rep in the PCS union and I'm involved in the Yes PCS organising committee that's put this evening together. First of all, the housekeeping as ever, the necessary business. If the fire alarm goes off, we're not expecting it, so please, in an orderly fashion, leave the door that you came in and head to the left via the fire doors. Just to explain a little bit about what this evening is about. Yes, PCS is a grouping within the largest civil service union. It was formed back in conference in Brighton back in May of this year. Two of the founding members are sitting on the table today. They're two of our guest speakers, Jerry and Kat, who you'll hear from later. It has grown from a base of nothing back last summer to an organisation that has now got hundreds of members across Scotland. And interest in the Yes campaign across our union continues to grow as the referendum approaches and also as the attacks on our jobs increase. So hopefully you'll find the information in our speakers' contributions tonight informative, and they'll make the passionate case for why trade unionists should support Yes. Looking along the table, I'm sure that you'll see that we've got an excellent evening in front of us, and the level of discussion might just be a bit more relevant to working people than the musings of an extra from Doctor Who in a tartan jacket. So we've asked speeches. We've asked all speakers to keep the contributions as brief as possible. Seeing as we're sitting at a table with a bunch of trade unionists, that might be wishful thinking. But hopefully at the end of the evening we've got a little bit of time to do a Q&A. For those of you that are technologically minded, and if you're on the Twitter, please use the hashtag YesPCS if you're live tweeting this evening's meeting. So we'll go on to the first of our speakers. You often hear in meetings such as this someone say the very glib, cliched comment, the next speaker needs no introduction. And I think this is the first time I've actually been able to say that and mean it, because the next speaker truly does need no introduction. She's my MSP, more importantly she's a Deputy First Minister, and she's our Independence Olympian. First speaker is Nicola Sturgeon.
Shout and I'll start to use the microphone. Thank you very much, John, for that introduction. I have to start with a very awkward confession. I've changed my mind. I was listening to David Cameron this morning and he said, you know, because I quite like seeing Mo Farah win gold, then I have to put up with the bedroom tax, austerity cuts, the welfare state being demolished, him being the Prime Minister, despite the fact most of us didn't vote for him, and I thought, well, that's fine, absolutely. So I've changed my mind, I'm going to vote no. Then again, maybe I won't bother, because David Cameron, ladies and gentlemen, is a living embodiment of the democratic case for Scotland being an independent country, so that never again we have to put up with Tory governments that we don't vote for. So let me say quite clearly to David Cameron right now, the more you want to intervene in this debate, the better. It's a real privilege for me to be here tonight. Can I say, on a personal level, it's a particular privilege, as it always is, to be in the presence of some of the UCS veterans here this evening. I don't want to sort of diverge into a debate about shipbuilding. It's a subject close to my heart, which makes it quite distressing actually to listen. It's good to listen about all the investment in the Clyde in shipbuilding, but it will break my heart to see government shipyards not there anymore, and I hope we can move ahead with shipbuilding on both shipyards on the Clyde. I think it's fantastic, the debate that's going on within the trade union movement just now. And tonight, this fantastic turnout here tonight is evidence of the vibrancy of that debate. I want to pay particular credit to PCS for the debate that is being held and facilitated within PCS. I look forward to being at the special conference you'll be having in a few weeks' time. But I think it's really brilliant to see the trade union movement collectively and within individual trade unions be such a strong part of this debate for two reasons. Firstly, your voice deserves to be heard in this debate, because if trade unions are not active and vocal in the debate about what kind of country we want Scotland to be, then there will be something seriously wrong with that debate. But secondly, it's right and essential for your voice to be heard, because in an independent Scotland, the trade union movement is going to be a voice, a partner, an influential force for change in Scotland. So I totally welcome gatherings like this, where you as trade unionists are making your voice heard. I was really struck when the PCS did the survey of members, asking members what you wanted from the independence referendum debate. The feedback from that was that it wasn't just about terms and conditions, important though they are. What your members wanted was a debate about what kind of country we wanted to be. It's about public services, about how we care for the vulnerable. And that's as it should be, because that is what this debate is all about. It's about who governs us. Is it us who govern ourselves, or is it toffs like David Cameron that don't have a mandate here in Scotland who govern us? And what kind of country do we want Scotland to be? And those are the two questions for me that are absolutely central to anybody deciding whether they're going to vote yes or no. For me, the case for independence, generally, and I'll be specific in some respects to trade unionists, but the case for me boils down to three things. It's we absolutely can be an independent country. We should be an independent country, and actually I would go further and say we must be an independent country. We can because we're one of the richest countries in the world. I just did a conversation with a taxi driver on the way over here. It's the first taxi driver I've spoken to for a long time who wasn't emphatically yes. And he asked me, was asking me about the referendum, and asked him how he was going to vote, and he said, oh, I don't know, I think I'll vote no. We could never afford to be independent. And you're like, whatever else might make you decide not to vote yes, don't let it be that. We're one of the richest countries in the world. We are not subsidised. If anything, the opposite is the case. So we can be independent. There is no doubt about that. But the more powerful argument for me is the one that says we should be independent, because side by side with Scotland as one of the richest countries in the world is the horrendous, scandalous fact that we are also one of the most unequal countries in the world. We have levels of child poverty in this country that are absolutely scandalous, and they're going to get worse if we don't change the direction that we're on. So we should be independent to get our hands on the levers of decision making and our hands on our own resources, so that we can begin the process of transforming our country for the better. I have been in the SNP all my adult life, but I have never ever been the kind of nationalist who just wants independence for its own sake so that we can hoist the saltire instead of the Union Jack. I want independence for the power and the ability it gives us to change our country, to create the socially just country that I want to live in. And we've shown already in Scotland, in the years we've had the Scottish Parliament, that when we take responsibility ourselves, we do things differently and we do things better. It's only because we're independent when it comes to running the health service that we are protecting the health service from the outrageous privatisation that's been seen south of the border. It's only because we're independent that we're able to protect free access to education, something I feel so passionately, strongly about. It's only because we're independent in certain respects already that we can do things like protect facility time for trade unionists. We need the powers to complete that journey, powers over the economy and welfare and defence, to make sure that we can take better decisions in other areas as well. I want to live in a country that invests in public services, not in Trident nuclear missiles on the Clyde. I want to live in a country that has a decent welfare state that protects the vulnerable, but actually a country that does more than that, a country that says if you're in work you should earn a decent wage to support yourself and give your family a decent standard of living, a country where the minimum wage isn't eroded but increases at least, and I stress at least, in line with inflation, a country where we get to the point where we're paying the living wage, not just the minimum wage. I want to live in a country where we see good industrial relations, trade unions and employers and government working together collaboratively as a good thing, something to be valued, not something to be eroded and threatened. I want to see company boards with employee representatives on them as of right, not as some kind of favour that they think they're being done. That's the kind of country I want to live in, and I honestly believe we can only start the process of building that kind of country if we vote yes and become independent. But you know, the third reason I want us to be independent, the must of all of this, I've talked about the can and the should, the must of all of this is because of what will happen if we don't vote for independence. Because this is not a choice between some kind of cosy status quo and the change offered by independence. This is a choice of two futures. And the future that opens up for Scotland, if we don't vote yes, is one for Hinckley that is a pretty awful and frightening prospect. Because that's a future where we will see more austerity cuts hitting the poorest and most vulnerable in our society. We are going to see the welfare state continue to be eroded, I think dismantled beyond any recognition. The NHS privatisation happening in England will reach a point where we won't be able to protect the NHS in Scotland from that, because it will start to hit the funding for our NHS. We'll see a future where there's no more powers for the Scottish Parliament, regardless of what the other parties say. The idea that after a no vote there's going to be some benevolent Westminster decision to hand more powers to the Scottish Parliament is frankly pie in the sky. That's what we stand to face the prospect of if we vote no. And we run the very real risk of yet another Tory government that we didn't vote for. I know there's a lot of folk in Scotland who voted Labour all their life, who, if it could be guaranteed they'd get a Labour government that actually promoted Labour values and did the things that Labour governments once did, would probably prefer that to independence. I know that. But you know what? We cannot guarantee there will be a Labour government. How many times has Scotland voted Labour and ended up with the Tories? I don't want to take that risk again. And even if we do end up with a Labour government, it's a Labour government that's been elected on the back of votes in Middle England and has had to play to get those votes in Middle England. So we end up with a Labour government that's indistinguishable from a Tory government like the one that Tony Blair led. I want us to do things differently in Scotland. I want us to have the ability to elect the kind of governments that will help to create and build the kind of country we want to be. The last thing I would say to those who are undecided in this, because there's a lot of folk I speak to who, in their hearts, they want to vote yes, and the one thing that holds them back is this idea that we'd be turning our back on folk elsewhere in the UK that don't like the Tories and don't like what's happening any more than we do. And I get that, to be perfectly honest. I'm the granddaughter of somebody from the north of England I get that, but I actually think if you've got a chance to lead by example, you've got to take that chance. I actually think it shows and will show more solidarity with people in England who think like we do if we demonstrate that there is an alternative, that there is a better way to how their country is being governed. So for all of these reasons, I believe with everything I've got that yes is the right option for our country. It's the right option for trade unionists, it's the right option for our country generally. And the one thing that keeps me awake at night right now is not the thought of going round persuading folk to vote yes. That's going pretty well, I have to say. The one thing that occasionally keeps me... Sorry?
Just the one thing?
The one thing what? That keeps me awake? The only one thing... Sorry, shut up. You've thrown me off my... I tell you, one of the things that keeps me awake... I don't often get embarrassed, but I've just got to embarrassed. It's the thought of waking up the morning after the referendum and thinking we've just fallen short, and turning on my telly and there's that smug Cameron face laughing at us out of his television because he's kept his hands on Scottish resources, he's kept his hands on Scotland. I don't want that to happen, and I don't think there's many people in Scotland, whether they're yet decided to vote yes or not, that would want to think of that being what we woke up to on the 19th of September. So I hope we all get out there over these next few months and do everything, I know I will, do everything in our power to make this a yes, because it is the key that turns the lock in the door to a better Scotland. It won't happen overnight, nothing good happens easily, but if we get that yes vote, then we've taken the first step to building the kind of country that I want to live in, that you want to live in, and that all of us want to see our children and grandchildren grow up in. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Nicola. Absolutely stunning stuff. Just have to say we have had one complaint during your speech, Nicola. We've had David Cameron send us a text to object to being called a toff. Apparently he's far posher than that. Nicola does have a prior engagement to attend afterwards, so I'm sure we can all understand in the current climate with the referendum campaign and excuse Nicola if she needs to leave before the end of the meeting. Our next speaker this evening has been active in the PCS union and its predecessor since 1981. He's one of the most outspoken critics of the Westminster government's austerity agenda. He's Glaswegian born and bred. It's our National Vice President, John McAnally.
Thank you very much, John, and thank you very much for the invite tonight. A really impressive meeting on a Friday night, which shows the intensity of the debate in Scotland. And when my union entered into the debate, it did so on the basis of one simple principle, that there had to be a full, democratic and open debate within the union itself, and we've stuck to that. We've had forums, we've sent out information, and just at the end of this month we're going to have a policy conference, a conference, as Nicola said. Another thing we believe is that trade unionists cannot be bystanders in this debate. It is our job to speak for not just our members, but for our people, our class, to voice their grievances and to raise their aspirations. And, of course, to set the agenda and put demands on the politicians, whether it be in favour of a yes or a no vote. And what do those demands say look like? Fair pay, jobs, not job cuts, an end to privatisation, tax justice, a fair and equitable welfare system, investment, not cuts, trade union rights and civil liberties. Now, on the question of self-determination, I've spent most of my adult life living in England, hasn't done me any harm, but I've never been in a position where I've operated, if you like, from a nationalist point of view, saying there's something special about Scotland, but I've neither have I ever understood why there's any question or any worry about the question of self-determination. It seems to be a pretty reasonable democratic demand that the founders of our movement, like Keir Hardie, advocated and understood. But the question is, why now? Well, I believe there are many reasons, but there are two principal reasons. One is there are relentless attacks from the neoliberal assault by an international elite, incidentally, and the austerity programme in this country. But I think, linked to that, there is also a crisis of political representation, where the four main UK parties are agreed on one simple thing, and that is not only is there no alternative to the market, but there's no alternative to the market in its most extreme neoliberal form. And I think that is fed in to a crisis in the leadership of the trade union movement itself. We saw just a few years ago the biggest strike, arguably, in British history in terms of public sector pensions. I don't like using this language, but it was sold out, and what happened? The Tories were given a green light to go on a rampage that ended with the bedroom tax, and congratulations to the Scottish Parliament for doing what it did the other day. But a rampage... meant that in the 6th or 7th richest country in the world, we now see poverty on literally third world levels. That is an obscenity in anybody's book. So in a sense, because of that lack of leadership, there was an inevitability about the fact that the battle against austerity and the desire for an alternative and the desire for a better society would be channeled through the question of independence. So the question for me as a trade union is this. And I'll say this, and I don't want to offend anybody, but I don't start from the position of what is good for my country. I start from the position what is good for my class. And what that means, when I talk about my class, what I'm talking about in this and every other country is the vast majority of the population itself. Now, I think the route to self-determination is a legitimate route for any people to take if they think they can get a better deal from it. I want to make a few points which I'm going to recognise tonight might not be the most popular in this environment. Obviously I'm here because I support yes. I'm sure that's already got through to you. But trade unionists and socialists cannot take an uncritical attitude towards the question of self-determination and the yes vote itself. Because Nicola has very properly set out the vision for a fairer society, and I believe that is what drives people like Nicola, and that is what drives people in terms of the yes vote. But I believe there's a contradiction. I believe that in terms of a fairer society, you cannot build that on the basis of low tax. I don't think you can base it being tied to the Bank of England, and I think that is recognised, incidentally, in the spending plans that have already been set out. And we don't want to get an independent Scotland only to end up with austerity light. So from that point of view, I think we as trade unionists have to set out properly what demands, what policies are necessary in order to achieve what Nicola has actually just set out. Now, having said that, what was set out in the white paper and by Nicola just a few moments ago as a vision, as an alternative. Let me turn to the no case. As an unbending, unremitting, ongoing cuts and privatisation agenda. It says that austerity is here and austerity is here to stay. And one of the worst political errors, in my opinion, that I've seen in many a long year is when Joanne Lamont said in public there has to be an end to the something for nothing culture. There is no room in the labour and trade union movement for that kind of hate speech. degeneration of the Labour Party and the Labour leaders, and I was a member of the Labour Party in Easterhouse for 16 years when I was a lot younger than I am today. But if you want to measure the degeneration, it's this. Rather than put forward a socialist policy, rather than put even forward a reformist policy, rather than give even the slightest relief in terms of the austerity programme, they, Ed Miliband and Ed Balls, from their point of view, would rather lose Scotland. They would rather lose it. And if they would rather lose it, what does that mean for the future under a Labour government? It means the same as what we're getting now. It might be slightly ameliorated, but it is exactly the same, and that is why we need an alternative. I want to make this point. I observe this debate to some extent from England, and one of the things that's kept me amused, not just John Barrowman, which I thought was a shame because I like Captain Jack, I like Doctor Who, but it's the intensity of what has correctly been called Project Fear. And I will make this prediction here today. Yes, there's some silly stuff like Rory Stewart talking about 100,000 people holding hands across Hadrian's Wall. Yes, there's comedy, but there is also something a lot nastier. And that campaign is going to intensify, because as far as the British and the UK establishment is concerned, that the idea that there's any alternative at all being posed for working people is totally unacceptable. Their view is you toe the line and you shut up, and that's the end of the story. But that is going to build over the course of the coming period. So from my point, as a socialist and a trade unionist, what do we do? Do we say, well, the question of national self-determination is nothing to do with us, we're all internationalists? Do we remain silent, or do we remain detached? I believe if the trade union movement and trade unionists do that, they will be on the wrong side of history. Because what they will be doing is saying or buying into the idea there's no alternative. We have to recognise in our movement there is a qualitative difference between the case being put by the Yes campaign in Scotland and the No campaign. And the way I would put it is this: a vote No is a vote for austerity. To vote No is to vote for that soulless, heartless void at the centre of austerity itself, and neoliberalism. And if we vote No, that will be seen by the UK establishment as an endorsement of austerity. But on the other hand, if we vote Yes, we first of all, and I ask myself this question: who is it that supports a Yes vote? It is the youth, it's the young people, it's the trade unionists, it's the poorest sections of the working class and the more astute sections of the working class in terms of looking at the big picture. And it's those people with a vested interest in change who support Yes. And in a sense, that's all we need to know, because it's those people with the right policies that will make it happen. So from that point of view, I'll say this in conclusion: we cannot, as trade unionists and socialists, be uncritical of the white paper and of the case it's being put. That would be an obligation of responsibility. Because, I'll tell you this, if, and this is one of my nightmares, that if there was a Yes vote, the morning afterwards, a Scottish government's called in by the international bankers and so on and told, right, you've had your fun, now here are the rules. We have to make sure that the battle for Scottish independence is backed up by the correct policies. And I'll say this: you cannot build even what Nicola set out without an extension of public ownership and socialist policies. I believe that is ruled out. I don't believe you can build a fair and democratic society based on the most repressive trade union laws and the industrialised world. So, in conclusion, support Yes, support the campaign, but on the basis of stepping up our campaign to build an alternative to austerity, on the basis of building a mass movement